The practice of mapping key opinion leaders, or KOLs, has existed in the healthcare industry for many years. It's a practice that helps for pharmaceutical companies and medical technology companies to understand which physicians are truly driving leading thinking in their field, who are the ones that other doctors are looking to for advances in treatments and technologies. That practice, however, has been one that is focused almost exclusively on what that doctor has done. Today, though, just as in most other parts of life, in medicine it's not just about what you've done, it's also about who you know. Hello and welcome to Data Point, the podcast where we focus on all the ways that data and analytics are driving innovation in healthcare today. I'm your host, Greg Matthews, and our guest today is Ryan Peeler, who is the Senior Director of Network Analytics at Voxx Analytics, a company that does next-generation KOL mapping. Ryan is also a real expert in understanding the dynamics of social networks and the ways to measure them. If you enjoy stretching your brain like I do, I think you're really going to enjoy this. So Ryan Peeler from Voxx Analytics, we are glad to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So as you know, we are going to be talking a lot about patterns of physician influence and other things that are near and dear to my heart. But I wanted to see if you could give us a little bit of background and talk a little bit about how you came to be the head of network analytics at Voxx Analytics. I'm guessing that you didn't pop right out of your undergraduate studies into that role. How did that happen?
That's correct. I did not. So when I finished my undergrad work, which is in biology and genetics, so I was kind of this wet lab geek. I was trying to figure out what was a next step for me. And so I worked as a research coordinator in a lab at the University of Georgia. And that was a really formative experience for me because I got to talk to a lot of people who are top in their field, and specifically plant sciences and plant genetics. And I had access to a lot of people who were postdocs or finishing up PhDs. And so I got to get some advice from them or kind of see what they were going through. And I also, from the time I left high school to start college, I thought, oh, well, I think what I'll do is finish college and become a doctor. And so I was kind of weighing these two things that both had still a pretty long path ahead. And the best way to describe it, I guess, would be inertia or lack of. I was comfortable and really enjoyed the work that I was doing. And during that time, when I was working in the lab, there was someone who came to talk about this new program at this graduate school, and it was a combination program of a business program and a science curriculum. So it was the Keck Graduate Institute of Applied Life Sciences in Claremont, California, and it was such a gripping thought to me that I was like, okay, I'll apply and see if I can get in and go be part of that program, and I did. And so it was again partially an MBA and partially a science master's, and so at the end of it, I was prepared to go into a world to explain science to business people and explain business to science people and those sorts of things. And at that point in time, I met someone who was associated with the graduate school who is named Tony Page, and he was asking me what I was going to do when I graduated. I wasn't sure. And he was just putting together this idea to start this company that became Voxx Analytics. And his background is in strategic counterterrorism. And what he had done in a previous role in a previous life was look at the way these different groups of people are connected and do a link analysis on that. And he was working on early versions of Al-Qaeda and those sorts of things. And so it was a pretty compelling pitch to be able to say, well, if we can take this and apply it to communities of people who are working together and do a good thing with it, that would be pretty awesome. And so as an idea, that was compelling. So it was the first couple of years out of my graduate program. I was living that startup life where you're working really hard and not seeing any results for a little while and all that stuff. And then basically, after a couple of years of that, we started hitting some really important value drivers for pharma and biotech customers, and really kind of took off from there.
I'm curious, how much you think about the behavioral sciences and the psychology of network analysis. Does that come into the work at all, or into your more consultative business?
Yeah, there's a few aspects in which that's critically important, and part of it is understanding in a broader context what data means, and what, in the case of network analytics, the fact that two people are connected in this kind of roundabout way. Does it mean that if I put them in the same room and ask them questions about activity in an animal model of a molecule or something like that, that I'm going to get something that is new and interesting out of them that I wasn't expecting, because they have kind of this roundabout shared information kind of thing. That's one aspect of it. And another one is being able to target people who are interested in the same things in a way that gets you to very quickly to new depths of knowledge that maybe you've never seen articulated before, and doesn't necessarily appear in peer-reviewed journal publications or something like that. But you have a sense of experts in their field when they're talking about something. They have these opinions that more often than not, tend to be right, or at least you can see the play back and forth and kind of evaluate what it is you think is right, based on these two experts either having a very collegial argument with each other, or violently agreeing with each other, those types of things.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Yeah, this is interesting. And we're going to dive more into it here. But for the benefit of background, the work that you're doing today is in large degree oriented around helping your clients to understand patterns of physician influence and how ideas and behaviors evolve through the course of a network. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, that's correct.
So as you think about that, and it or contextualizing it for the listener, that's work that's been done for a long time, in the pharma industry and in the med tech industry. How have you seen that evolve, or as you were looking back at the history, how have you seen that evolve with the work that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. When we talk about this historically to people, there are basically two ways that people used to do it, and the first of which is called bibliometrics, and that's where you look at the number of publications that someone has, or the number of clinical trials they've participated in, or the number of times something they've been doing has been cited. And so in that case, it's just an arithmetic counting of things to say, well, this person has 28 of this and 5 of this and 30 of this.
Yep.
And then you get this stack of people who you're comparing the value of those numbers to each other. So that's one approach. The other major approach that people had used historically is what's called sociometrics, and that has some benefits to it as well, where you can say, oh, I know Dr. X has a vast knowledge and large patient pool of this type of cancer or something like that. So why don't we go ask him who he thinks is important? And he might come back with 4 or 5 names, and we can say, okay, number 1 on his list, let's go ask her who she thinks is important, kind of spider web out that way. There's some drawbacks to that, obviously, where you have some bias that's built into it, and you end up kind of getting people who naturally have affinities for each other. And so you may not get the diversity of opinion there. And it also can be kind of expensive if you're paying honoraria and you're paying someone to do the surveys and those types of things. So the sort of hybrid version of that was what had been in vogue lately, which was identify a handful of different people based on the work that they're doing, and then go out and survey them and ask about their network. And so you end up with some sort of hybrid thing, which my opinion is that's better than either one of those two. But looking at it from a social network analytic perspective, which is what we do, where we look at an entire community, is superior in a lot of the ways, because you can still come out with the same top 20, top 50 list in a community in terms of who's important. That pretty much would be universally agreed upon. But when you get further and further down that list or that stack, you can kind of understand how everyone compares to each other in a relative way based on network measures. And you can look at what sub-communities are showing up. And so sometimes we may have a client who's interested in this topic or that topic X or Y, and they end up engaging a lot of people where you have a redundancy of connections and opinions in a certain area on a certain thing. And so you don't necessarily have an accurate view of what's going on, or you might miss some of the topics of interest that you're trying to glean from this community that you're studying.
Interesting. Okay. And actually, that's a good place for us to take a break. So we're going to stop for a second for a moment from our sponsors, but we will be right back with Ryan Peeler.
Today's show is brought to you by BlueSpire, a full-service digital marketing agency focused on complex and highly regulated industries of healthcare, senior living, and financial services. Rapid changes in the healthcare industry are causing consumers to seek out trusted advice, demand more transparency and access to information and content. With over 30 years of healthcare experience, BlueSpire knows how to help you reach, communicate with, and gain trust from these consumers. We help you engage with the right content at every touch point, from the first symptom search to appointment scheduling through care management. Visit us at bluespiremarketing.com to learn how we can help you deliver relevant, engaging content through ever-changing touch points that matter.
All right, and we are back. I'm your host, Greg Matthews. We are here on the Data Point podcast with Ryan Peeler, who is the head of network analytics at Voxx Analytics. And as we were going out to break, Ryan, we were talking a little bit about sort of the evolution of the ways that the influence in these physician networks is measured. And I want to continue that dialogue and go a little bit deeper, because before the break, you were teeing up for us sort of the basics of the bibliometric method, counting, number of publications or, number of clinical trials, et cetera. And there are certainly some nuances that go into that, when you start factoring in a journal impact factor or, the role that they play in a clinical trial. But even that, it's still basically counting. And I really want to talk about the network analytics, which is the place where you have made your name and where your focus is. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the ways that you measure those physician networks? How do you identify them? Where does the data come from? How do you weight those things? Can you walk us through how the network now plays into this study?
Sure. Yeah, there are a handful of things that we've seen over the years where we have these different methods to account for these that are built into the algorithms that we use. But one of the things that we like to talk about are work circles, which is repeat collaboration groups. And there are three key ways that we often find these subgroups and networks working together. One of them may be that they're organized by some sort of formal effort. In that case, we're thinking about clinical trials, or maybe they got a grant together, or something like that. And so that's one. The other one is just the convenience of geography. So you may have a bunch of people at Harvard who have a lot of resources and access to patients who are all working together to do a study or something like that, or just happen to be down the hall from each other, so it's super easy for them to collaborate. And then the third way is strictly by topic interest or something like that, where you have some kind of, niche area, some subcategory of a disease area that people might work together on. And so that type of bound by common niche interest kind of inspires people to work together. And then on top of that, we have this layer of seeing where people fit within a network. And so there are people who Uh, if anyone who is familiar with, say, the breast cancer community may know, oh, these are the top 20 people. Everyone knows that. You get a little further and further down the list, and you kind of need to understand that someone who may not publish that much or may not participate as a PI in clinical trials or those types of things still exerts possibly an outsized influence on what's happening within a disease community. And that could be because they're a broker, and that's someone who is the most, in network nerd terms, it's basically like someone who's the most frequent path of shortest connections between people or groups. And so you may have someone that in bibliometric and sociometric methods would never show up. And in fact, we had a client recently who engaged with some folks who would fall into that kind of category that were able to help them produce a tremendous amount of value on a molecule that they ended up selling to someone else based on having a broader understanding of the utility and the market potential for this compound. So
wow.
Those types of things show up more than you would expect in networks. And there's other patterns that I think are pretty cool where in Italy, for example, because of the way funding works there, and you can look at collaboration groups, and for most disease communities, everyone in Italy is working together in these really collaborative groups. And that could be cultural, or it could be part of the funding environment, that type of thing. And then another thing that's interesting is sometimes when we do a global view of a community for a customer, they may say, give me the top person in Japan, for example, and we can come back and say, so the highest ranked person in the globe who is based in Japan is this person. They're like, great. And so they'll send that out to their group in Japan, and they'll look at it and say, this person's not very influential here. What's going on? Huh. And what you have to do is isolate the analysis to what it is you're looking at. So, or what it is you want to know about. So what we would do in that case is say, let's only pull in the Japanese data points, rerun the same type of analytics, and then boom, provide them that. And they say, of course, these are all the most important people. Thank you.
It is amazing. Depending on what lens you're looking through, the answer can be so different. It's a really good example of that. And I guess one of the things that I'm curious about is the different kinds of data that you're using to make these determinations. You know, are there certain, of course, without revealing anything proprietary, but are there certain data types that you will always work with? Are there some that, you know, you can sprinkle in as necessary? And how do you make those determinations?
Yeah. So for most of the work that we do, we start with a baseline of publicly available data. And that would be all these things that we'd mentioned. It might be, again, each one of these, it would depend on the context or the lens that we're looking through. So at the beginning of an engagement when we're scoping it, we would say, by default, these are the things we would include, but it would be peer-reviewed journal publications, clinical trials, guidelines, where you get groups that are writing treatment guidelines for disease states and those types of things. We have these hospital lists that show kind of what centers of excellence are involved in different areas. So we pull that type of information. And then on top of that, we would spec in a lot of the other things that clients are interested in. They may say, well, these 10 congresses are of critical importance to us moving into this next phase of what we're doing, or as we're approaching launch, we want to be able to have some influence at such and such conference, that type of thing. Referral data so that you can see what shared patients exist between doctors. We'll have third-party agreements where we can layer in data that show prescribing patterns. So you might get some idea of someone might have a mid-sized practice, but a high volume of prescriptions for a certain type of drug. So being able to link someone who might be at a similar practice with a lower volume could be business beneficial for a client, those types of things. So being able to incorporate all of those things, we have different models that we use for the different contexts and data types that get pulled in.
So I would imagine that as you're integrating these various different types of data, the level of complexity can be pretty high from a pure data perspective. You talked earlier about the fact that you were sort of a bridge between, the world of biology and the world of business. Talk to me a little bit now about how you're helping to bridge the gap for people who may be really strong business experts among your clients, but not necessarily data experts. What are some of the things that you're doing to help them to be able to make more use of the data that they have access to?
Yeah, sure. So it feels like an echo of something that I saw earlier in my career, which was at the point in time where lots and lots of these model organism genomes started being sequenced. You had whole labs full of people that were working on trying to understand what these CATG sequences mean. Mm-hmm. And so basically you had people who understood biology really well that hardly touched computers and were mostly doing stuff in labs to see if this band lit up on a gel or something like that. And then you had computer scientists who understood very well how these different Perl scripts work behind extracting potential sequences of interest and that type of thing. And so being able to understand back and forth between those two, what are things that can really unlock the promise of genomics, that type of thing. So that was, I got to observe that from a pretty close distance 20 years ago. And then to be able to now talk to someone who maybe understands a disease state really well and has a lot of connections in a community, being able to take some very sophisticated data sets. If we just put down 5 gigabytes worth of CSVs or Excel files in front of someone and said, well, here you go, everything you need to know is in there, it seems unlikely that they'd be able to have the time and the bandwidth, if they had the know-how to do it, to actually get something useful out of that. Right. And similarly, if I have provided the flat files to someone in a pharma company and they had a great data analyst that went through and sliced and diced everything and made a beautiful PowerPoint out of it at the end, are we sure that it captures the right insights and that sort of thing? And so what we do is deploy all of this data through this web-based portal that is very visual. And so people can come to that with kind of their understanding and their questions and reduce kind of the questions that they have and the concepts that they have into the insights that they want. And they can save these dashboards and those types of things so that they might think, well, I want someone that works on these types of topics and someone that is in this particular geography and may be connected to these 4 or 5 people or people similar to what I'm thinking about, and maybe have some clinical trial experience or something like that. And in doing that, it is possible for someone clever to take a stack of spreadsheets and get to that. But in terms of having someone with field knowledge be able to generate these insights for themselves and for their team, it's better to have more of a visual approach with a robust and giant underlying data set.
So you're saying that rather than, forcing that person to either do a lot of manual labor or even to be able to write, the right script, they're able to do that through a visual interface.
That's correct. Yeah.
Incredibly valuable. Well, man, this is a topic that I could spend all day on, Ryan. Unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap it up today. We may have to come back for seconds at some point, but it's so exciting to hear about all the different ways that you've been focusing on understanding these networks, specifically networks of physicians. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I hope I helped someone.
Exactly. I know you did. Thanks to you, the listener, for being here. We are excited to be able to share this discussion with you. And don't forget to tune in 2 weeks from now for the next episode of Data Point. Thanks so much for listening to the Data Point podcast. If you like what you've heard, please do rate, review, and share it with your social network. It means a lot. And if you have ideas for show topics or guests, please email them to me at greg@healthquant.health or send a direct message to @ChiMoose on Twitter. That's CHIMOOSE on Twitter. For more information about this show or any of the terrific healthcare podcasts in the Touchpoint Media Network, check them out at touchpoint.health. See you next time.
This has been a Touchpoint Media production. To learn more about this show and others like it, please visit us online at touchpoint.health.